Wholeness, welcome. This is Josh of Inner Skilled and integratingpresence.com. And today I have Ben Oofana with me. And a little bit kind of a funny aside here. We've been talking for almost a half an hour, and it's my bad. I didn't say we started recording yet. So here we are. So I've gotten to know Ben a little bit through talking already, but I'll just start with my traditional way of introducing these things is who is Ben and what does he do? So we can take it from the top again and introduce yourself to the audience.
Well, going way back from early childhood, I was just drawn to Native Americans and other indigenous peoples. And so that fascination continued to grow into my adolescence. By the time I was 17, I was already on my own, landed in a community of predominantly Kiowa Indians, and started going into the peyote meetings, sitting up all night with the native elders. And that's where I met my mentor, Horace Dokai, one of the last surviving traditional Kiowa doctors or medicine men, who passed on portions of his own healing gifts to me. And in order to work with these gifts of healing, one's expected to go through the vision quest in order to earn the right to work with this medicine. And so typically the vision quest is 4 days and nights alone in the mountains without food and water, which I've gone many times since then. But I work as a conduit, as the traditional native doctors, healers have for many centuries, where we allow other forces or beings to descend into our body, to work through us, to facilitate healing within the bodies and minds of those we work with that would not otherwise be possible.
Well, this is fascinating. I was in a Order of the Arrow when I was younger, which is an organization within Scouts, and their purpose was to honor Native Americans. It's a whole nother conversation, but I'm fascinating this. And as just an aside before we get into the healing route here, someone that feels really called to do this, do you have any advice for them? Or like, say someone wants to go to meet Native people at their lands. How would you best go about that? Would you just say, oh, it will just happen? You'll just be put in those situations. Or is there some steps you need to take? Or how would you talk about this for someone that's interested in kind of a more of a shamanic role like this? How to go about it?
Well, one, I would say forget the workshops. I mean, there's individuals or groups or whatever, the shamanic whatever, and a lot of it I just see as absolute nonsense. I don't see it as any way reflective of the actual practices. Like a lot of people these days call themselves shamans, and they don't possess or have access to the kinds of power. They're not conduits where they allow those forces or beings to work through them to facilitate healing within the body and mind. This is not something you're ever going to get out of a workshop. It's not like a large group sort of thing, that you sign up for. It's if you really want to pursue this kind of path. Well, one, my mentor Horace was the last of the extraordinarily powerful doctors among his own Kiowa people. There are a few others, but they were okay, but not anywhere near the level that Horace had attained. Most of it has died out here in North America, and it causes me a lot of sadness. I see that. I mean, there are people that do some things, but again, most of it's lost. I mean, there's still some people that do the Sundance. There's still people go and do the Vision Quest. If you truly want to learn these things, it's like for me taking off at 17, and I was intending to go to Arizona thinking I would get in boarding school at Tuba City and I would finish high school. That was my plan then, but my car died in Oklahoma. And so I was living among this Kiowa community. And being that I was 17, I think some of these native elders that I managed to connect with, because I had a young friend my age, he introduced me to his uncle who was raising him. And my young friend says, "Hey, Dad, Ben wants to go in the peyote meetings," and he took me in. And even some of the other native elders like, "Oh, don't let him come in." And this elder Jack was like, "No, this one's different. Let him come in." And they made an exception for me. So the fact that I lived among these people, and I went totally native in doing so. And this was over a number of years. And then Horace would come back to Oklahoma periodically. He lived on the Navajo reservation. And so when he was running peyote meetings, I attended, and I was terrified even then that he would say, "This is only for Native folks, get out of here." And then when I finally approached him, and still terrified, shaking, as I want to learn to do what you're doing. And I went out to stay with Horace on the Navajo reservation, and I was with him for a couple of years, and he put me through all kinds of hell and high water. Just transmitting that power, going through the fast. And sometimes he would put me through these extreme tests, like, "Here's $30. He dumped me off in the middle of the Hopi Indian reservation and hitchhiked to Las Vegas. And make it the best you can." And I had to survive. So I went through a lot of extreme stuff. But these days, again, there are very, very few people operating at these kinds of levels. Most of it's died out. If you go into parts of South America, there are still individuals that possess some extraordinary gifts or powers, but I would also say be careful. It can be extraordinarily dangerous. I mean, there are some tribal groups that are still warlike. I mean, they're like open battles. They're fighting each other.
Yeah, and I've heard reports of dark sorcery, and even for money
There
and
is
things
that.
like this. Sure. Go ahead.
There is more of a distinction among at least the North American tribes that I was among. I'm older than I look, so we're going back like early 1980s when I began my apprenticeship. So, but this is 4 decades have passed now. And a lot of people that were around at that time have since passed on. And those who are left don't possess a lot of those now. But what I found was there's more of a clear distinction. The native elders that I spent time with, and they were shocked that this white kid, and he wants to go into this. He's learning from our last powerful native doctor, and they were just, it was mind blowing for them. It's like, and here are our own kids, they just want to go out and party, be in the modern world, whatever, and
Yeah.
hear this white kid sitting up in the peyote meetings all night with us. And they would caution me, and they would say, "Look, if you're going to do this, you better do it right. There's a lot of temptation. You could get in, you could be an idiot, you can abuse power, but if you do, it's really going to hit you hard. It's going to come back on you. So if you do this, you do it right." But if you go down into South America, some of those tribal groups there, from a lot of what I hear, people I talk with and interacted with, it's like there's more of a kind of playing on both sides of the fence. Some people can do some extraordinary, they have the power to facilitate healing, but some of them also do some harmful things with that power too. They can hurt people. And whereas among the tribes here in North America, the Kiowa and other native peoples I spent time with, it was like there was a more clear distinction. There was a dividing line between that.
This is all fascinating. So I haven't done a strong medicine journey like this. There are these what's called entheogens or plant medicine. To
Yeah.
me, today having a 2 hour meditation practice, it's the medicine is so strong and being fairly empathic or energetically
Mhm.
sensitive, I can be around someone that's on stronger medicine or, and I can kind of just tune in and get it,
Mhm.
not through osmosis, but however we want to feel it, energetic sensitivity. But these are things not to be taken lightly. And from what I gather, I tell people if you're called to engage in these, do a lot of research,
Mhm.
just don't jump into it and then
Mhm.
go to a seasoned, helpful practitioner and interview them and find out what they're about. Can you trust this person? Do they know what
Mhm.
they're doing? And follow what, and then when you finally decide to go into that, follow their guidance, do what they say, trust your inner
Yeah.
guidance too, but you have to kind of give yourself over to the practitioner, the administrator of this. And so
Right.
I leave, I mean, I can't tell anybody what to do anyway. I would just say that that's the way it is. Now I also wanted just real quick, because early on, I mean, one of the first kind of quote unquote spiritual books I read was a friend's mom gave me some Carlos Castaneda books. I was just completely blown away. Then I find out later that he might have fabricated a lot of this stuff. However, still have to ask, well, where did he get that information from? So I just wanted to get your take on that whole thing real quick, if there's anything worth mentioning about that.
That was one of my first, I don't know if I really want to say exposures because it's what I read later on was that he would spend hours sitting in the library at UCLA and he would read some of these esoteric yogic texts and the descriptions of these experiences that individuals had when they were just all this years of intensive daily practice and then he being in that region close to the Mexican border and having some knowledge of those native traditions and cultural stuff, and he just kind of weaved this narrative, and but it's fiction. I remember when I saw that with a tense integrity, and it's like. And I was like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And but when I began my apprenticeship, when I was training with Horace, and very quickly I'm thinking like, damn, this is nothing like anything I read in the Carlos Castaneda books, but at least I had enough common sense to take all that and throw it, toss it, it's
And
like,
I didn't at that time.
yeah.
Yeah, and it
I,
can be dangerous. Some of the stuff in there can be definitely dangerous for sure. So,
well, I had a friend from the Yaqui Indian tribe years ago that I've since lost touch with, and when we would be talking, at one point he's telling me about the white folks that would come to him, and after having read the Carlos Castaneda books, and now they're the authority on native, more specifically Yaqui Indian spirituality, and he's just like rolling his eyes, and it's like, and it's he's not going to argue with these folks. He just says it's nothing like the spirituality we grew up with.
that's so
I,
good.
I think that was what he said. That's what he enunciated. But the un,
The
the
back
part
behind the scenes, yeah.
that is what he's not saying is on the back end. It's like you fucking idiots.
Yeah, yeah. Read between the lines,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But it's. I think there. I would love to see more individuals learn from these indigenous healers. But to do so, it may involve, going to, way out into backcountry in Brazil, Peru, could be Malaysia, Indonesia, the Philippines, among these peoples, indigenous groups. Now, even in these other parts of the world, a lot of this is being lost. As a woman, you need to be even more careful because there are some individuals, as we all know, that just don't have good boundaries. And so there's a sexual component. I don't know how else to say it, but
Yeah, that's
it's
just
like they
clear
want
as day
something
there. Yeah.
a little more than, so, but it depends on the individual, and there are those that are operating from a place of integrity, but like you said earlier, do your homework. And when I lived among Native people for all those years, there was this sense of like, keep your back to the wall and just be careful and, don't just jump in immediately, and just you sit back and you watch and you get a sense of people and you get to know what each person's about, because there was a lot of drama that was playing out in the community, and it was also quite dangerous, because of the alcohol consumption. There was a lot of violence. There were alcohol-related automobile accidents, alcohol-related beatings and killings, and just a lot of crazy dysfunction going on. And after having gotten into a few very dangerous experiences where I could have gotten killed, because I was this like 17 turning 18, and up into my early 20s, it was like I learned very quick I better pay attention, or it's like I may not come out of it alive.
Yes, so much just in daily life when we talk about things like this. Then there's substances involved, and social dynamics, all these things. So I guess what else do people should know about if they go into like a group? Do you facilitate group healings? Is it all one-on-one? Maybe any advice about that on both the someone seeking a practitioner, and then for practitioners themselves who engage on the healing end of this, kind of wisdom and knowledge that people, what you think, need to know around this.
Again, there's
Mhm.
very few people operating on this level
Mhm.
that I am at this point in time, and it's I would like to see there be a lot more. I I mean, there are a lot of people that call themselves shamans, and I don't see anything about that to me in any way really resembles what was practiced among the native people, among the tribes. They don't possess that power. That it's a lot of it just, I don't take it seriously, to be honest. If you do venture down to South America, for instance, you can find people, but again, I think it's important to take your time to research a bit, to find out who's good, who truly is gifted. There are also people in some remote areas, as I mentioned, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and all these areas. Sometimes there are dangers in these areas. I mean, there's crime. For me, having spent a great deal of time in Sri Lanka, and I've got into dangerous situations where I physically had to fight my way out of there. I mean, like, people try to assault or kidnap me, and I'm picking up chairs, for instance, or a chair, and going on the attack against an assailant. Things like that happening. So there are substantial risks. It's now back in the 90s, after. See, I began my training in the early 80s, and Horace transmitted portions of his own healing gifts. And for a couple of years, I put myself back in college. I needed to reassemble myself, and I was earning a degree, finishing a degree in college during that time. And and then graduating in the late 80s, and as I started working with people, and a lot of the trauma that I carried, as I began to work with people, that medicine that Horace transmitted to me, that power, as it began to awaken, it was like pouring hydrogen peroxide into an infected wound. And so a lot of this emotional wounding, the trauma that I carried, that was emerging at the time. And that led me to develop an intensive series of meditation practices to facilitate the healing of this emotional wounding. But what I was going to say is at that time, there were some very gifted healers. I got to work with one from the Philippines, another from Brazil. And this was back in the 90s. And in those days, a number of these individuals would travel to the United States. They had a circuit. They would go through the United States, maybe Europe, and work with people, but it's a different day and age. Again, a lot of these practices are dying out over time. There are fewer people who have the capacity to work on these levels, and it saddens me because, again, I would love to see this continue. There were many such individuals among the native tribes. And then, 1870s, 80s, whatever, depending further east, some of those tribes earlier, but they were putting them onto reservations, taking the children, putting them in boarding schools. And then as the years went by, just a lot of these people losing touch with those aspects. There were a lot of the native doctors wanting to pass these gifts, these powers, this medicine onto the younger generation. But these children were taken, shipped away great distances to go to school, often not coming home for years. And by the time many of them came back, they didn't want to go that route. They weren't willing to take on these gifts, this medicine, these powers. And so many of the old doctors took it to the grave with them. And so each generation, there is like a greater loss, more and more was being lost. There is still some individuals, maybe if you go among, let's say, the Navajo or among the Lakota people in the Dakotas, there's some individuals, but I don't know. I can't think of anyone who's alive right now that I know personally that I could send somebody to. There's a man in upstate New York that I worked with briefly before he moved out, and he was working with some Lakota people that he suffered a traumatic brain injury when he was violently assaulted. I mean, suffered a severe, brain trauma and I got to work with him one time before he left the New York area, before he moved away. And the improvement that he experienced as a result of the session that we did was profound. And yet, as I was scanning his body, his mind, and especially around the head, around the brain itself, and it's like, you were working with some of these Lakota people or a doctor or whatever. And, I was a little dumbfounded, like, there should be a lot more, you shouldn't be in the shape you're in. There should be a lot more healing or a change that should have occurred. And then after working with him, what he was already, he was in the process of moving at the time I got to work with him. And so what he was recounting to me about the differences, the changes he had experienced, the healing that had taken place where cognitively he was functioning way better. It turns out traumatic brain injuries is something that responds very well to the different native doctors possess different kinds of gifts, different kinds of power, and it wasn't just some universal life energy like these people who go through 3 weekend workshops. They're very different powers, and so some were known for neurological issues or digestive, respiratory, or so they had their areas of specialization, like you would go to a specialist in our modern day world. For me, it's the fact that there are so few people practicing at this time, and also the fact that I've gone dozens of times. Like just over a month ago, I came down. It was my 62nd time to go through the Vision Quest, and for me, it's not about impressing anyone. It's just I have this insatiable
Put in the
desire.
hours. Yes.
Yeah, it's like, how far can I go? I'm inspired by these individuals in these different traditions that are so connected to the force of creation, and they become the embodiment of that. So for me, it's like, how far can I go into this? How much of this connection can I experience?
Let's talk about that particular case a little bit. So, what do you attribute that to? You said he was. I guess maybe we need a little bit more background or information. So, if he was hanging around a lot of high-end, high-quality healers and native traditions, then what attributed to that? Was it maybe past actions, karma, or shouldn't he have been more protected, or something like that? I also want to ask if you can jump into the unless I misunderstood the story there, but we talk about the particulars of these. So what are they drawing on? How do they do it? What do they draw on, especially when it talks about when you're talking about specialization? So what kind of, like, the energies, techniques that might vary from one healing specialty to another, and then I want to get into the bigger picture of how is humanity in this mess to begin with, So let's start wherever you want there.
Boy, I think that's 5 or 6 questions, but I'll see if I could track them.
I throw a lot of stuff out there real quick. So if you don't address all, that's okay. We can come back to any of them.
Sure. So going back to this individual, he was again violently assaulted. And there's from what I recall of what he shared with me, he was going up to his apartment in his elevator, and it was like late in the evening. He wasn't really thinking anything about it, but there were 2 young men who got into the elevator with him, and he had one of these apartments where when the elevator opens up, it opens directly into your apartment. You have a key that so that it's going to open only to your apartment. And there's like certain apartments in New York City, usually the nicer apartments. So he was working in the financial industry at the time. And I think this was going back before he had this connection, got involved with some of the native people. He would travel back and forth to South Dakota. I think that came later on, and I don't know how he made that connection. And what I was saying is that with him, the individual that he was working with, and I think a lot of it stems from the fact that in times past, you had a lot of extraordinarily powerful doctors, like my mentor Horace. The healing that he facilitated in so many instances was just absolutely mind-blowing. He was just, again, extraordinarily powerful. And yet, as time has gone on, there are individuals who possess some gifts. Maybe they're gifted to some extent, but they're just not at that level as some of these doctors from times past. And so, yes, he had done some work with someone from, among the Lakota people, but then I met him through a woman that I've been working with for about a decade now. And so she introduced me to him. She met him through a community where they were doing sweat lodges or something like that. And so when I saw him and whenever I work with people, I scan the body. I have them stand in front of me and I hold my hand in front of the body, or in his case, I'm going around the head because I need to see the extent of how the brain's functioning, the damage. And so I feel through my hand, but I'm also viewing internally. What I feel here, I could also see it internally. So I have two senses that I use simultaneously to correspond or to see. I correlate these senses, if I'm articulating this in any way that makes sense. But and then what I'll do is I'll tell the person, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm feeling. How does this correlate with what you're experiencing? Because verification is very important to me. I want to make sure that I'm on target here. And so working with him, again, I work as a conduit. Horace transmitted portions of his own healing gifts to me, and then having gone through so many vision quests, even in the vision quest, what will happen is various entities or beings will come to me. I'll feel them descend into my body and have these visionary experiences, and I could feel those beings working within me. And there are times I'll be working with an individual after coming off the mountain, and a person or maybe a number of people I'm working with will describe specific beings or a certain presence that had come to me when I was on the mountain. And people who don't know each other, people who've never met before. But so I'm working with this individual, and as I have with many other individuals who's had suffered traumatic brain injury, they'll feel as this regenerative process occurring within the brain itself, repairing the damage. Now, I work with people with all kinds of other conditions, heart disease, stroke, which also, results in damage within the brain. And digestive disorders were people who would describe a sensation at times of feeling hands going into the body, doing reconstructive work. Someone who maybe has suffered from ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease or IBS, and they could feel the repair taking place within the digestive tract. And so in working with him, I regret that here he's left New York so quickly. He was in right at the time he was moving. But even in that one session we got to do, it's like he was cognitively, he was more present, he was functioning better, more lucid. He wasn't experiencing a lot of the, and this is probably going back maybe 8 years or more so, being that I've worked with 4,000 or so people. In 8 years, I don't remember as much detail, but he was describing like a lot of before, just a lot of disorientation and a lot of, if you suffer like severe blows to the head, there's a lot of things such as headaches and, again, disorientation and a lot of these just kind of weird neurological. I don't remember as much the specifics that he related to me at the time, but when I spoke with him afterwards, he was sharing with me that a lot of that had cleared up. And traumatic brain injury, for many people, it's slower than, say, like digestive disorders like colitis and Crohn's disease. I've had people working with them, they'd be passing blood in their stools and be in a lot of pain in maybe 5 or 6 sessions. And they are like no longer in pain and no longer passing blood. And so digestive disorders tend to respond rapidly. This man, there was a pretty dramatic immediate response, but a lot of times I'll work with people with traumatic brain injuries and I'll see a more gradual improvement with them. Each session, it's like there's a woman, for instance, she had suffered from meningitis, and I first worked with her, she'd say a few words, get lost in space. It'd take her forever to complete a thought. And after working with her, after some time, I'd be having a conversation with her, and she just sounded like any other normal person. So
It's wild. I guess some people are just kind of more ripe for healing. I mean, they're just kind of more predisposed to have quicker effects. Some people are more stubborn. We talked earlier about kind of the disconnect from our emotions and how emotions are really key in a lot of healing and a lot of trauma work too. And just so you know, that's I mean, I wish this would pick up on the post production, but when you started talking about the exact effect the moment of it had, there was a color change and shift in the color around you, and then I could start seeing, like, I don't know, some people would call it an aura or an energy field that stuck out. And I've noticed these things. I've even seen, I mean, this is maybe a little bit too woo-woo, but I've even seen orbs come across in interviews that I've had, but they don't show up once the processing gets done in the video. But anyway,
right.
it just is it take my word for it or not? And even for those that are into hardcore science, there was this, I think was it Steven Pinker that talked about this HM case, and they said this guy, he was like missing a lot of brain matter, so he should have been like, mentally retarded or whatever the correct terminology is on that. But it turned out that he had a standard IQ. So we know that it's even in these scientific things that a lot of things that we normally that science normally thinks isn't possible is. And I love hearing about science things too. That's great, but that's not my path either. I don't need instrumentation to see what's right in front of my face a lot of times. But it's totally
Yeah.
cool. If people want that verification and they have to measure everything with machines, then, if that's what it takes, then go for that too. I can't stand in the way of that. So let's talk about, if you want to pick up on that, but emotions, how key they are and how people can work with them and how they relate to healing and trauma. And then if there's any kind of societal things on the whole of why so much healing is needed, especially in today, I think. Maybe it's always been that way, or what's your take on that? Or is it more today, or is that even important to address?
Hugely. And in our cultures, societies throughout the world, there's a lack of emotional literacy. We had these rigidly structured societies for hundreds, for thousands of years, where there's this lack of understanding of the importance of our emotions. And even in the various spiritual traditions, whether among the Native Americans, in the Hindu Vedic tradition in India, many other ancient spiritual traditions, there's just not the understanding of the importance and the role that emotions serve. Emotions can be irrational at times. We have feelings that come up, emotional responses that cause us to react or that distort our perceptions. But a lot of that, the fact that initially we may have that reactivity under certain circumstances, or when we're faced with a challenging situation or in some interaction. But the fact that most people have never learned to work constructively with their emotions, and that's why so many of us get into trouble. In these ancient traditional cultures, there's this pathway or this avenue through which one can develop tremendous power. Through these practices and interventions, you have people even developing various paranormal abilities, and yet not understanding how to deal with their emotions. And I see these individuals in different traditions who end up acting out, abusing power in one way or another. But what happens is when you have that degree of power, and the power itself is impartial, and when you hold all this emotion, this stress, these uh, whatever trauma or wounding you've experienced, and you hold that within your body, and that power filters through, that emanates from you, and it filters through this emotional wounding or this dysfunction that you hold within yourself. My mentor taught me a lesson he never intended to teach me, because I saw how he became destructive at times because of not understanding his own emotional wounding. The fact that I had this trauma that I was confronted with, I was consumed by it. And so because of what was happening, where I was forming these attachments in my 20s, mid-20s, to women who were unavailable, disinterested, some instances abusive, and it was evoking so much painful emotion. And so instinctively diving into the depths of that emotion, even if it took hours, in some instances I keep breathing, and it would, at a certain point where it'd break open, come out of my body in waves, and I'd feel that emanations of warmth glowing from within. But over time, I just continue to work with this practice. I wasn't in that excruciating pain, but we all are triggered in one way or another by people, circumstances, events, our concerns. And so whatever would be happening, I learned to acknowledge what was going on, step 1. 2, what do I feel in response to it? 3, where are these emotions situated within my body? Are they in my abdomen and chest cavity, dispersed throughout my body and my solar plexus? I would descend into the depths of what I was feeling, breathe very softly, very deeply, and just follow these feelings and bodily sensations, and they would go through a progression. Often emotions will intensify, maybe they'll move or shift around to different locations in the body. As I continue to follow them, sometimes it will, maybe anger might transition to sadness. Maybe if there's disappointment, maybe as that emotion becomes more diffuse, it will lead to acceptance. Maybe I'll come up with, a lot of times, creative insights, workable solutions to the challenges I'm facing, or get the insight as to, oh, here's what I need to say to address this issue. And so it's crucial that we learn to work constructively with our emotions. This is missing for so many people. In any healing modality that you work with, as you incorporate this practice that I'm describing, it will make your body so much more malleable. It will make you far more receptive to the healing. Because what I find is that when I work with people, and there are people that sometimes they don't want to feel, it's like, I don't want to go there, I don't want to look at that, I don't want to deal with those issues. And that makes their bodies armored. It creates this density. The body isn't as pliable, it isn't as malleable, responsive as it could be. And the other thing too is that, and pertaining to the emotions here, is that if you're working in one of these spiritual traditions, whatever it may be, whether it has its roots in Taoism, I've also trained for years with a master from China in these internal martial arts rooted in Taoism, training with a Native American doctor if you're following Hindu Vedic traditions. You need that foundation on the emotional level. You see, like a lot of the present day gurus and all of the crazy ass drama that's being enacted, a lot of the scandals that are playing out with them. And a lot of it's because, well, they have a certain power that they're connected to, that they channel or embody, whatever, but a lot of them don't deal with the emotional component. And so they end up acting out all that dysfunction. So you need this foundation emotionally working constructively with your emotions on a day-to-day basis. And we need to combine, because like I'll do the deep emotional work, but I also find what happens too is that I'll get to a certain point on my own, but then a big part of the reason I've gone back to do the vision quest is that at a certain point I do hit a wall. And so when I go on the vision quest, that presence, that power comes in and it works to transform some of the scarring or wounding that I've carried that I wasn't fully able to heal just on my own.
So much of this is important and resonates with me too. When you're talking about the different ins and outs of within the body and different things that happen. What I've heard that I found in my own experience too, that devastation can reveal deep truth within me. And yeah, I don't wish it on anyone, especially myself, but I did find that in a couple instances where I was completely devastated, that it did uncover a deep truth. Now, I feel that this is really important for, men, just I'm old school, men really aren't taught to express their feelings or even work anything. It's just either suppress them or, let them out in like sports or, things like this. But, it's considered, not masculine or something that's just not valued or honored, respected as much. But I would say, though, that if you're facing one's pain instead of running from it, numbing it out, distracting it, doing something that's dishonorable, disrespectful to yourself and those you love and family and things, is to actually turn towards it and address it like you're talking about. And
Yeah.
there's no kind of shame or disrespect in seeking out those who have already been down this path and are know what's going on with these things. And just the basic techniques you talked about, I found very helpful in my own experience, and then when the heart opens and how painful that can be, how painful it was for me anyway, when it first started happening. I thought I was having a heart attack or something, I thought I was going to have to call and report, but it was just this deep ache, and this weeping that happened in my meditation practice early on, where, the tears were actually kind of, one perception is that they are watering the heart and helping it open, breaking open the heart to let the light in. Some of these sayings are kind of cliche, but it really is. There's so much kind of the body keeps the score, as the famous book says, right? That
Yeah.
there's whatever kind of thought or emotion we have, there's tends to be a bodily correspondence if we tune in to how that experience is also being experienced somewhere in the body. And there's so many layers of subtlety. I mean, some are quite obvious and glaring once we just take a moment to stop and tune in. And some things are really, really subtle. There can be lots of releases on many different levels. And the other thing you talk about is relationships and the kind of the archetype with the female archetypes you talk about. And I don't want to say too much here, but I definitely have seen that in some of my past love interests and things like this. It really is something. And then to also, maybe this is a little bit too much, but, for me, it's obvious now. You don't get into a relationship on the basis of I can help fix this person, I
Yeah.
mean, usually that's the women that do that with the men, but for us, I'm not saying you did that, but I'm like, I took it almost as a challenge. I've taken it as challenges like that, but that's not the right basis for starting a relationship, obviously now. But it's almost like I had to go through it, or maybe I didn't, because I wasn't wise enough at the time. People around me were telling me, don't do that, don't do that. And I just ignored it and did it anyway. But I'm at the end of the day, I guess, in a way, I'm glad I've gone through it because I learned so much from it. And now it opened new doorways and vistas that I'm now involved in. So, yeah, I guess the question is if you want to address men, and if you want to say as far as addressing pain anymore, if that makes any sense to do so. And then also, if we want to talk a little bit more about certain type of relationship archetypes when it comes to this, which you've mentioned earlier, a little bit more in detail.
I think that definitely the conditioning is stronger as far as there's a lack of permission for men to experience their authentic emotional responses, not permissible to be vulnerable, to experience the fear, the hurt, the anxiety. And so many men have a tendency to disconnect from that, and that could be disastrous on many levels because and I see how it plays out in relationships a lot of times because you also have instances where women want a man who's a rock, who's stoic and strong and where they feel safe and protected and but the guy's grossly insensitive, and then these women, as I work with them, complain to me, it's like, he's so insensitive, he's such an asshole, he doesn't, you know, he doesn't understand how hurtful that is. And it's like, well, you wanted this strong man, and but and that's one reason why I have found it much easier for me, like relationship wise, being in India and Sri Lanka, because I can be more feeling and authentic. I could be in touch with my own vulnerability and express that. And there's a lot more acceptance for that, these aspects of me that I have found lacking. The fact that years ago, like when I carried a lot of this trauma and in the dominant society, I met with a lot of just rejection because of that. It's like I wasn't acceptable because of that. I did find more acceptance among Native American women, though. Yeah, I could be more authentic there. But another way that men not being able to be fully authentic, to be present with their own vulnerability, their hurt, their fears, their insecurities, just that emotional disconnect, is that it creates a blindness. And I've seen many instances where these men who were successful in many respects, but there are these gaps or blind spots, and it would at times precipitate they weren't seeing the whole picture, and sometimes there were times in their business, professionally, where they would where things would collapse, and so I think that accounts for a lot of the lack of empathy as well, that where it impedes their ability to bond, and to the extent that we shut down emotionally, that we're disconnected emotionally, that there are these like serious gaps in our ability to be present with the partner, to relate. We're just not going to have as deep of a connection. And so it takes courage and a willingness to and an understanding, wow, this really is an important aspect of myself. And this is an aspect of me that I need to work with to develop this whole side of myself. That understanding is missing. And so, we can develop professionally in terms of, our business or whatever vocation we're in, and maybe develop athletically or intellectually or whatever, but there's this lack of understanding in terms of developing this emotional intelligence or literacy, developing these sides of us. And even though we feel, a lot of us, again, we don't want to go there, and it's like, okay, we get in there, it feels uncomfortable. What do I do with this? And we panic, we freak. It's like, oh, shut that down. Be strong, be stoic. And but it's like parts of us are frozen developmentally when we do that. But the more that we can go to these places, and even though we feel intimidated, we feel out of control, we feel our life is shit, and that how well, no, let me be a little graphic. We feel we're fucked up, or how fucked up the drama we're caught up in. And when we can be fully present with that, there's a level of honesty. We need to expand our definition of honesty, because on one hand, it's like, yes, give a truthful answer. Well, that's only a small part of honesty. When we can be fully present with our authentic feeling responses, even if we feel like, oh, it made this huge disaster. I'm in this incredibly toxic relationship, or things are blowing apart or not working, and, the disaster in our professional life or some other aspect of life. When we can be fully present with that, feel our authentic emotional responses to that, we stay present with that, breathing from the depths of these feelings, and there's a deep level processing, a working through, a gaining insights, and helps us to clean up ourselves, our relationships, sometimes letting go of toxic, unhealthy attachments, maybe an addictive attachment to someone who's very dysfunctional or maybe hurtful or abusive. Or we gain insights where it's clean up a lot of there's someone I was working with recently. He's a visionary in many respects and developing technology, but opened multiple, all these companies, that he's opened up, and there's all these tax bills mounting up for each companies. So he's like skating over the top of this. He's not seeing a lot of this other mess underneath. And so this is just an example. His wife has to go in and clean up the mess underneath. And when we're disconnected emotionally, there's ways that we don't see a lot of like what's going on underneath here. And so it's only when we become fully present and develop this emotional side of ourselves that we're able to, connect with all these different aspects of ourselves. And there's this reconciliation of the conflicts. We recognize what's out of balance, and we incorporate these other parts of ourselves. And there's, again, that cleaning up. And am I making sense the way I'm describing
No,
it?
you're totally right. And it's what it leads me to what comes up now around this is it ties back into the certain female archetype we were talking about. And reflecting on this, I found in my experience, one of the reasons I was drawn kind of like a moth to a flame is because it was kind of thrilling in a certain respect. There was a huge potential for growth, but as we know, that you can also be very dangerous. Some people say that a lot of growth and advancement comes from trauma. Now, this is a more of a left-hand path idea, and I can't deny that, but I also can't tell people to seek this out for their growth and advancement. I think that's ridiculous too, because we have enough challenges in our daily life that we don't need to go and seek out extremes in order for that. That's not right. I think that's totally off and unbalanced. However, I wonder if there's just some kind of primal attraction to these things, whether, for the reasons I mentioned or whatever, I don't know. Do you have a take on that? And, this, as far as men addressing these things, sometimes it took me to hit kind of rock bottom to see the importance of these things. Maybe hopefully it doesn't have to do that for a lot of people. Hopefully people don't have to go through such extremes. And I feel maybe eventually we'll get to a state of consciousness where we won't need crisis after crisis in order to learn and grow, and advance and elevate and all these great things. And it can be a more gradual path. And some people, it seems like they do better with crisis. What's your take on that? And I think we're going to wrap up around this topic and start wrapping up. And then after you address this, I want you to tell people a little bit about where they can find you online, and then leave and what you've got going on, and also what message you'd like to leave people with. Okay, so that's plenty for you to go on.
Okay. So, especially if, I mean, and it varies so much depending on our early life experiences, our upbringing. And some of us have grown up in environments where there is there's a lot of stagnation. There wasn't like a lot of drama or dysfunction. And there's a lot of people who can go through life and just kind of coast and just ride along. And you know, when they talk about attachment theory, you have individuals. There's more of a, say, secure attachment style, and they have parents, for instance, that are, say, loving and supportive, and maybe they tend to partner with somebody who's also has more of that secure attachment style, and there's these like long-term bonds they establish, and maybe they happen to internalize some of the aspects of the stability of their parents, and they get into a career where they're well compensated. And I'll work with these individuals. There's not quite as much drama playing out in many of their lives. Now, it can vary if we're vulnerable as we come of age, and if we happen to, I think it's like maybe 15% of the population would fall into the categories of like cluster B personality disorders like borderline narcissism, sociopathy, all that. And so in that case, even with that supportive, loving background, being that we're naive and vulnerable, if we form an attachment to such an individual in our late teens or 20s, and that can leave some profoundly deep emotional wounds that could set a pattern in motion that we continue to play out for years or decades to come. But many of these individuals, they can live these relatively stable and secure lives. But as I work with them, what I find is a lot of times there is a stagnation, and they may not attract like a lot of the crises or manifest a lot of the crises in their lives, and there may not be quite as much drama. And not that I'm saying everybody needs drama, but especially those of us who have experienced a great deal of trauma early in our lives, our crazy ass family dysfunction, we're more likely to reenact that as we go along, as we move through the years, as we grow into adulthood. And in addition, if we follow these paths, like for me, training with a Native American doctor, going into these other spiritual traditions where there's extraordinary power. And when you're working with that power too, it tends to amplify whatever trauma or emotional wounding you're carrying. So you're more likely to experience these crises. That could go either way. And the fact that a lot of us avoid the dealing with the trauma itself or the emotional wounding, we want to sweep it under the rug, avoid it, just not go there, not deal with it. And so there's that component. There's also the fact that not knowing how to deal with our emotional wounding, that a lot of people are just lacking the understanding of resources, and people can get trapped in that. So it could go different directions. It's a lot of people, when they experience trauma, some kind of devastation in their life, even just devastating divorce or breakup, a lot of people contract around those experiences, and there can be a shutting down. In our teens and our 20s, a lot of times we have this optimism, we have all this hope for what our life can be. But when we experience these devastating setbacks or blows, a lot of people contract around that. So again, double-edged sword. It can be very damaging. It can destroy us in some instances. the devastating losses or setbacks or deeply wounding or traumatic experiences. But when we set the intention of like, okay, so this is what's happened, this is my life lesson, how can I use this to learn, to grow, to evolve? And so that's what the mindset that I've taken. Again, how do you use this to learn, to grow, to evolve? And so what resources, this is where it's so important that we do practice on a daily basis. For instance, like the practice that I shared with you earlier, and that we incorporate the most effective therapeutic interventions as we do practice, as we incorporate these interventions, again, daily practice, and then doing the interventions. And then we transmute the suffering, and it helps us to heal, to evolve, to become more. But it takes courage, and it takes that determination. It takes commitment and consistency. Again, daily intensive practice. Training with a Native American doctor, a master from China, some of these other ancient spiritual traditions, those who develop this extraordinary power, it's because they're doing practice on a daily basis, and they're, again, incorporating the interventions as well. And so we need that courage to just keep going at it. It's like we're affected by we have these traumas or setbacks. How can I use this to heal and grow and evolve?
Well, beautiful, Ben. I couldn't agree more. I would say the biggest boon, benefit in my life has been a daily practice. It gives
Mm-hmm.
a consistency, it gives like an anchor, it gives something to fall back on. But it also is the container for a lot of this healing to happen.
Right.
It just turns into a natural habit. It replaces or habits that aren't helpful.
Mm-hmm.
It gives time for feedback, reflection, feeling. Just feel it. Just
Yeah.
feeling it. So that it carves aside the time for so many other things to happen, and
Right.
it becomes second nature at a certain point. I tell people, sure, you could go a day without brushing your teeth, but you probably wouldn't want to, and you don't think
Right.
really anything about it. It just becomes another habit like anything else. And the intervention thing is really important too. I've noticed kind of boosts in healing and advancement when I do have encounters with really remarkable individuals and people that are really authentic. For those that are into the Buddhist path, the Buddha said the entirety of the spiritual life is spiritual friends. Who we associate with is going to make a difference, a huge difference. And it's really about spiritual friendship a lot too. And teachers, teachers are those that can really, that have been further on the path and that have expertise and are there
Mm-hmm.
to help and assist us. So Ben, thanks so much for coming on here and talking to me today. You guys, my bad. We got into so much other territory, world traveling, and even more specifics on your mentor and things like that. But to check out Ben's other work, and Ben, where can people find you online? What do you have going on? And then what kind of just message would you like to take people out on here today?
The best way to find me is go to my website, benoofana.com. I'll share all the website, social media links, all that. You'll post that below. Uh, okay, good. And so, yes, benoofana.com. There is a contact form, the Google Voice number, which is on there, 332-333-5155. You can reach out to me. Just call, leave a message. I'll call you back. I do have a YouTube channel where I'm posting videos where I address a wide range of issues, health and healing, body, mind, facing life's many challenges. You could find me on um, Instagram. If you see Twitter or Facebook, you can see I am passionate about animal rescue, and I'm unapologetically pro-democracy. I think part of it for me being in Sri Lanka during its brutal war with the LTTE, the Tamil Tigers, that, and I mean, they were fighting for their independent homeland. They were subjected to like apartheid conditions, but yeah, that's a big long thing. But I don't want to go too into that right now. But I am unapologetically pro-democracy because of my experiences, supporting Ukraine's struggle for freedom, all that, obviously. But so you'll see that if you look at my Facebook or Twitter or whatever. But yeah, you can follow me, but definitely follow me on YouTube and go to my website, reach out to me. And I do, if you look on my website, you could see where you could sign up and you could have my articles and videos sent directly to your inbox. And if you're in the midst of a breakup or divorce by chance, there's a free ebook you could download, just gettingoveryourbreakup.com, or just even schedule a call like refiningrelationships.com. So there's multiple ways that you could connect with me.
Well, very cool. And for those just listening to the audio and somehow don't see the spelling, it's Oofana. So that's just type that into the search engine too. So Ben, thanks again, and
thank you.
May all you out there find the most optimal healing methodologies and practitioners and self-work, and may all beings everywhere realize awakening and be free. Bye now.
Thank you.